Hello and welcome to the Race to Speak Up podcast. I'm your host, Devin Moore. Today's guest is Kalika Curry. Kalika is the Community Impact Manager for Eastside Pathways. Eastside Pathways is a community-wide partnership of over more than 90 public, private, and nonprofit organizations supported by a backbone organization that is transforming the way our community works together to make a positive impact in the lives of children and youth. So welcome, Kalia. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here, and it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm a huge fan. I got to learn about your work, I think it was back in 2020. So it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be speaking with you. So why don't you tell us about Eastside Pathways?
Yeah, Eastside Pathways, we are in East King County in the Seattle, greater Seattle area. And we are really focused on changing outcomes for youth and young people. The framing is from cradle to career or birth to age 26. We are we use the collective impact model, which means we're looking at people and organizations from different sectors to work together to change systemic issues. So it's just a really great place to be able to work in concert with other people who really care about changing outcomes for kids.
So why don't you tell us about how your journey with Eastside Pathways began?
Oh man, that's a really juicy question. I might get a little emotional. So I actually grew up in the Lake Washington School District. I identify as multiracial. And growing up, I was always the only person of color in the classroom. And I didn't have the language for it then, but I experienced a lot of racial trauma and a lot of racial isolation. And as we now know and we recognize, I also received a very harmful misrepresentation of our country and our history. And so as I grew a little bit older, one of the most formative first jobs I've ever had where I really felt like it was meaningful is I worked for the YMCA of Greater Seattle. And my first 5 years with YMCA of Greater Seattle, I worked at a teen center, and it was seated in the city of Kirkland, which is actually where I was born and raised. And it was so interesting as an adult to support young people who are treated like the other, whether that because they had purple hair or they had learning disabilities or family dynamics or their racial or ethnic identity. To be an adult in that space in my community and be able to see that through an adult's eyes really just spurred my passion. And then I was really, really fortunate to have bosses and mentors who saw me and saw my skill sets and saw my potential. And particularly our executive director, Stephanie Charrington, said, do you like what you're doing? Because I think I have something that you'd be really good at. And my executive director at the YMCA also said, hey, there's this community partnership called Eastside Pathways. And they have a group called CC, which stood for Community Engagement for Cultural Integration. And I know how passionate you are about equity work, and I feel like you'd be a good fit for it. So having two different people who I love and respect to this day say, there's something here that I think you'd be really good at. So that's how I got into this work. I did it as a volunteer for 2 years while I still worked for the YMCA of Greater Seattle. And then I made the transition about 3 years ago to work here full time.
Wow, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it's honestly interesting to hear that backstory as far as, how you got involved with Eastside Pathways and, your own experience dealing with race. Whenever this topic comes up, I always kind of just also talk about my own experiences dealing with being one of 3 Black people in my grade at this predominantly white middle school and elementary school. And, you feel isolated. You feel like you can't relate to the large majority of people there. There's so many, I met youth who have gone through that similar feeling of feeling isolated in their own environment where they should feel comfortable and where they should feel, happy and loved and belonged. And that's why I think that schools really need to be more diverse. Yeah. They need to have that, they need to have this open place where you can honestly talk about that. I guess as time moves on, but still you need to have this open place where you can talk about race, where you can talk about, different things that relate to your identity. And, your position includes dealing with human behavior. So what have you learned that's been interesting?
Yeah. One, thank you for sharing your experience because it definitely resonated a lot with me. I think the first thing, when people say, "Can you love me like you love my food?" Um, I think about that as a great example of when you say like schools need to be more diverse. Because I think people who are just starting to scratch the surface of doing this work are really thinking about food, fabric, fashion, right? Cultural responsiveness. What are the things that make people feel at home? Doing anti-racist work is much deeper than that, right? Because it's about the ways things that are set up, the ideologies and belief systems that are underneath that. So when someone says, "Can you love me like you love my food?" What we're saying is like, great, you love the things that I do for you, but you don't love me. And that's where that spectrum of like white supremacy culture, whiteness at the center, and then anti-blackness at the other end of that spectrum. And when we think about the things that people like about people of color, it's like, we like your food, we like the way that you work hard, we like the way that you entertain us. But do we really know and like you for who you are? And I think, again, going back to the experience around being a young person, one of the things that we know about the young developing brain is like the teenage years, there's something really critical about like the growth of humankind and exploration is saying like, I'm a teenager and I'm going to leave the nest and I'm going to create my own story and I'm going to create my own identity and I'm going to become the author of who I am and who I want to be in the future. Where I think that's a little bit tricky for people of color being raised in predominantly white areas is your education all the way up until that point has said, you don't belong here. And something about you and it's is inherently wrong. And that's a really, really hard thing to grapple with. So I think one of the first things, and you've already said it, is belonging is such a fundamental part of being human. And if your whole entire story to that date has been something's wrong with you and you don't belong here, and Devin, I don't know if you've ever had this moment, but I remember being in the classroom and it would be Black History Month and everybody would stare. And then I remember I would look at the teacher and I'm thinking, you're in charge here. And I see you seeing how these people are treating me. And you feel like this is totally normal. And I'm looking at my peers, these other white students, and they also think it's normal and okay to treat me that way. So the human brain says, I'm the only person who thinks something is wrong with this. So the problem must be me. So when I think about your question around like how do I work with people and what do I know about people is everybody wants to belong, but there's a lot of people who don't feel like they belong. And that's where that like whiteness at the center thing comes into place. And I really want to be careful to say that like whiteness from my perspective isn't about white people. I'm half white. There are things that I love culturally and ethnically about my ancestors that are French and Danish and English, but that's not the same thing as whiteness. And so for me, it's getting really, really clear around not just universally treating everybody the same, but being really clear about spending time to get to know people so that they know that they belong and who they are inherently. Just the way you woke up this morning makes you beautiful and amazing and a gift. And I think that's one of the things that I bring into my practice of working with people. And then the other thing I'll say is one of my dear friends, Tracy Myers, she runs her company is called Middle Waters. Sorry about that. My friend Tracy, who runs a company called Middle Waters, she has a workshop called Humble and Brave. And one of the things that really strikes me in her workshop is this moment where we really think about what are we afraid of? What are we afraid of losing? What are the things that prevent us from doing what we know to be the right thing? And I think that's the other piece. So belonging and then recognizing fear is a part of the human experience. And like the reptilian part of our brain, that part that says like fight, fight, or flee or disassociate, one that we don't talk about very often, that's the thing that more often than not is preventing us from being the humans that we really ought to be. I think those are two of the big things that I think about in my practice is making sure that people know that they belong and they don't have to change who they are culturally or ethnically uh, to belong in this room, and recognizing that fear plays a huge role in us being the best versions of ourselves.
That's really important. That's really important for a lot more people to really understand because, oh, actually, you know what? Now I kind of just want to bring up the story that you brought up with like Black History Month. I have definitely gone through that. It
Oh Lord.
wasn't, I don't know if it was even actually specifically Black History Month, but just everyone staring, those eyes, the white people not understanding. Yes, that happened to me. Where I
It
remember there was
happened.
this one instance. where like I'm like, this is just a few years ago. Like this kind of just happened in a way that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, so like it was middle school, and there was a picture of like people getting lynched on the board, on the smart board. Um all those eyes. Keep in mind the lights were off, so because like you could, so that we could see the board, I could feel all the eyes directly going to me. Um yeah, no, that was terrifying actually, because I heard some of them laughing. I heard some of them genuinely laughing, thinking that black people getting killed, black people getting lynched, black people getting murdered by the KKK. Yeah, this was a KKK also instance as well, Kalika. So, it's terrifying. And I'm like, hearing you also go through something like that, like it lets me know that I'm not alone. Because I always tell people that you're not alone, but just hearing another person bring up something that I wasn't even thinking about bringing up actually too, it's so terrifying to know that this is actually going on in so many different places around the world at young ages too.
Yep.
I mean, racism, bullying, all this can happen at any age, and it shouldn't be happening. But still, it could happen so young. You're getting exposed to that in an environment where you need to feel comfortable. I always say this: when you go to school, you should be feeling comfortable. You should be feeling, or excuse me, well, yeah, you should be feeling comfortable. But what I'm trying to say is, you should be getting that education. You should be learning. You shouldn't be feeling like isolated for being the only black person or just only person of color in general at your school. You
Yeah,
know, that one picture that the teacher put up on the board, I don't even remember why he put it up anyway, but that one teacher that, the
that's
picture that he
huge.
put up on the board for the white kids to laugh at, and you're the only black kid in the room feeling uncomfortable, starting to, like, the thoughts, they're coming, you're starting to think, these people want to hurt me. These people want me dead. These people think that, you know, the black lives getting killed is funny.
Mhm.
That's not funny. And actually, I kind of want to talk to you about that. Well, we're talking about it, but I mean, I want to talk to you about Black Lives Matter. So, what are your, well, first I want to ask you, did you go to any protests for
Yes, I
Black
have
Lives Matter?
protests. I have.
Okay.
Before we, I wanna back up a little bit because and I'm gonna play the elder card. Being your elder, being older than you, I want to play this. I'm gonna push back a little bit because I think one of the things when we think about race, we have a tendency to think about what's happening out there, and we don't think about what's happening in here. And there's a tool on the internet, and there's like tons of different versions of it, but it's the 4 types of racism: personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. We have a tendency to talk about structural and institutional racism, right? So like capitalism, you can't avoid it. Like there's nowhere you can live without paying for rent somewhere. You could even barter for clothes, but like you can't avoid racism, you can't avoid capitalism in the United States. So the like social constructs that run our country, we have a tendency to like talk about that. We also have a tendency to talk about institutional racism, that policy is racist, that practice is racist. The data shows that Black people get pulled over for more for driving while Black and end up being murdered for it. Like we have those conversations. Sometimes we talk about interpersonal racism. That person was racist. When my teacher, who had no business putting that picture up on the screen, put that with the context missing, are you the right person to be doing that? Can you do that in a way that is anti-racist? Can you share that information and educate young people on the history of our country in a way, interpersonally, that adds value to my life? Can you do that? Can we have that conversation? And the most important part, and why I wanted to take pause here, Devin, is how much time do people of color and white people, all people, spend time addressing the internalized impact of that? Like, how much time do we really spend with ourselves thinking about the fact that you and I both have had experiences of being the only person of color in a room and have been experiencing public trauma, and we're not seen, heard, or supported in that moment? How is that internalized and how has that impacted me? That's the conversation we're not having enough. And I think when we experience that trauma, we also experience fear, and then we just shove it to the side. And I think that's the most important part and a huge part of my practice is, one, people over productivity, which is why I'm saying, let's not jump to the next question. I want to spend time with you, reflecting and seeing you and acknowledging that was not okay. It shouldn't be happening and you deserve better. Also, when you said it's important for me, like I tell other people you're not alone, but it's important to have share these stories with people who look like us so that we can remind it that it's not a me problem, it's not a Devin problem, it's our system problem, and it's how we treat each other. So going to your question around Black Lives Matter, I have gone to marches, and I think that protest is one fundamental um, component in the movement or any movement for social justice, right? And I don't think it's the only component in it, right? When I think about what has made change in the history of our country, when we study the work of our elders, we see that protest played a fundamental role in it. We also knew there was more to it. Allyship was a big part of it. Like, who is messing with us? Who's out here in these streets with us? It's not just that we're loud and we're a large body, but like, who is here and what authority and influence do those people have? And then I think the other component is, to be really frank, like, how do we make this white people's problem? Right? Because it's about collapsing the spectrum of anti-blackness, right? So when we think about like boycotts, we hit you in the wallet. This is your problem now. You don't care that where I sit on a bus, but if I say I'm not riding your bus anymore, and now you're not making the money that you wanted to make, now it's your problem. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that we're protesting, it was that I know what your currency is, and I'm hitting you in that currency. I know what you value, and I'm hitting you in that value pocket. So you don't care if I don't feel welcome on your bus, but you care if you get my quarter for riding the bus. So I'm gonna take my quarter back. Right? You're not getting my quarter. So it wasn't just about protest, it was about understanding the values and the currency of whatever system you're trying to dismantle, and then being strategic in hitting it in that place.
Oh, sorry, I'm just kind of processing that because that's very true. Now that I'm really thinking about it, and we really do need to stop and look back at how it really does feel as far as racism. Like how does that really feel on me? Because whenever I like, well, okay, so one way that I tend to describe it, and like I guess just to make it easier for others when I'm saying it, is that when you get hated on for your race, it feels like a punch to your gut
Mhm.
because melanin. I have beautiful melanin. You can see that I'm black. And regardless, I am black. So it hurts you. It could, I know how when there are certain things that whether it affects you like it could affect you mentally, but that could also still turn into physical effects too. So I'm like, that's just kind of where I came up with that correlation. But I still think that that holds a lot of truth too. And so I'm just always I'm really always just like, we need education. We need an open conversation like what we have, what we're having right now. Because without an open conversation to really figure out what's wrong and if there's even any positive solutions to it, if there's any ways to prevent it, if there's any ways to do anything with it, then let's work towards that. But we need agreement with it. And or well, I think we need an agreement, but there are times where we may not necessarily agree, but we still need to come to some conclusion that would hopefully benefit all of us in a way where no one gets hurt anymore and no one is, targeted for anything. No one's feeling like an outcast. I know with bullying, oh, this is kind of going back to a point you made earlier about like high school age. Wait, I'm sorry. You brought up something earlier about like high school age being like a key point when you start to realize certain things. So I know like I would just kind of say middle school, although high school definitely heightens up as well. But like as far as bullying in middle school, that's when you really start to figure out that you are different from everyone. And when you're the only black person or the only one thing out of this whole room of like predominantly white or predominantly whatever, you feel that outcast. You feel
Mhm.
like you don't know what group you can go to. If
Yeah.
there's a group you can go to, if there's anything that you can go to. So I'm
Mhm.
just like, when you hit high school, that's when you start figuring out that you don't look like everyone else. This person doesn't have white skin like this person. This person doesn't have black skin like this person. Whoever is not, this person's not gay, this person is not straight, this person is not, like we're all different. And then that starts to form cliques with whatever you feel comfortable in. You start forming cliques and you start feeling comfortable in those cliques. but there are times where you leave others out. And that could also be like a breeding ground for bullying or a breeding ground for hate, a breeding ground for hate. And that's where that really starts to rise and rise. And then in high school, it just rises even more and more because you're still learning stuff. You're still getting put this information into your head. And that's why I also think if, we also need to dive into the bully's life. I hope I'm not kind of going on rambling with this because I want to continue hearing what you're saying, but like, we really need to dive into um the bully's life. Like, what's going on at home? Why are you hating on this person because they're Black? Why are you hating on this person because they're disabled? Why are you hating on this person because they're gay? Why are
Mhm.
you doing this? Why are you doing this?
Hurt
And
people, hurt
that
people.
yeah, and that racism is being taught, like, brought down from generation to generation to generation. We need to completely cut that off. It's 2022. That's been long overdue. Oh, that rhymes. It's 2022. It's been long overdue.
That's it right there. You got a
Yeah.
bumper sticker, a t-shirt, a tattoo, like whatever you need to rock it. You know, I want to like, I got to give credit to elders and ancestors and thought partners in the world who've inspired me. A couple of things that have come up for me. One, when you were talking about like hurting, pain is a part of the human experience, right? Like it's just the source of that pain that I think that makes it so unbearable. There's I think it's Jeffrey Campbell. I could be wrong about that, so you should fact check me. But there's a model out there, and I think Jeffrey Campbell uses it as his work. But he talks about allostatic and allostosis load, and allostosis is healthy stress, right? It's the amount of stress that like builds muscle, right? When we work out, we get sore muscles, but it was enough stress to not where we tore a muscle and did damage, but it created micro tears that allow us to grow bigger muscles, right? Like that's healthy, productive stress. Allostasis. Allostatic is the amount of stress that causes measurable damage to the body. And when we think about high blood pressure and diabetes and all these other things that we chronically see in bodies of color, they are byproducts of this allostatic load, this chronic trauma, chronic stress. So I guess I'm not in the school of thought that like my life someday will be pain free because it's a part of the human experience. Um, it's a way that our minds and our bodies tell us what's working, what's not working for us. I think the difference around like the psychological pain is recognizing that something that going back to those four types of racism, when you and also that bully piece is like how much time am I spending my time with myself? So if hurt people, am I going back and thinking about, you know, when so and so in my family treated me this way, this is the way that it made me feel. And I would never want to make another person feel that way. Do we get to that place of healing and consciousness so that when we're in a dynamic with another person, are we using those broken tools that our ancestors and elders handed to us? Right. So, we think about the impact that enslavement had on Black bodies in the United States, and what it means to be a descendant of people who have done that. Like I remember one of the things my Black grandmother would tell me all the time was, baby, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. And that meant a lot to me. But then as I got a little bit older and I started on my being really conscious about my racial healing, what I realized is that I have more privileges being a light skinned Black woman, a multiracial Black woman. I also have more privileges because of the work of Dr. King and other people in the movement, which means I can say things that aren't nice and not worry about being lynched. Right. And so my grandmother was trying to protect me, and I have more permission than she did. And I didn't have the same fears that she did. And so that's a great example for me of like in her time, that was the thing that helped her make her feel safe, that helped her deal with that fear around what might happen to her, what might happen to any of her grandchildren, what might happen to me. And I can be able to say, thank you, grandmother, for keeping me safe. And due to the work that people before me did, I can say to someone, no, you can't touch my hair. And it's not cool that you want to touch my hair. And my grandma would be like, baby, just that's not nice. Just go ahead about your business. Right. Like, so I think that's where I get back to that like healing piece around like bullying is spending the time with myself to do that healing and make that cognitive connection. So when it comes to the interpersonal racism and someone's doing something racist to me, I'm not internalizing that thinking something's wrong with me. I'm able to say, that's on you. And I'm going to give that back to you. And I'm going to set a healthy boundary for myself. right? And I think that's another part of the racial equity conversation that's missing, is Black people or people of color doing healing and then being able to set healthy boundaries and not being afraid of losing their job or being worried about being disliked. And so I would offer the work of Resma Menikin. It's actually on my desk. My Grandmother's Hands. I know everybody's talking about it, but My Grandmother's Hands, he has a whole section talking about like the lie of white fragility and the hurt that happens to Black people's bodies when they're internalizing those things and not speaking their truth. So I would just really offer up those things. And then um, when you were talking about like the formative years of being a young person, there's an author, Yuval Noah Harari, who talks about like all of us coming from Africa, and then like what was the thing in humans that made them want to like leave where there was water and food and family. And it's that part of us in those young early years where we're like confident and energetic and we're like, deuces, I'm gonna go explore, right? And now that we've explored all of the face of our planet, that part of is still a part of us as human beings. So this idea of leaving the nest is a part of the success of the human race. It just looks different now. So that's another great book that I love. That helped me really think about reframing that as an asset and a strength of young people, that resilience and that smarts and that courageousness, that as you get a little bit older, you're like, oh, baby, my knees, I don't know if I can take that.
That's so interesting to think about. I really it because it's just like, and I gotta look up those books that you just talked about too. I'm definitely gonna look up those. But I'm just like, now that I'm always kind of thinking about this, because I always think about, what is the future generations gonna look like? Are they gonna go through less pain than, any generation as of right now in the current day is going through? Are they gonna go through less pain, whether it's dealing with their race or anything that, because with bullying, you could honestly be bullied for anything. But
Yeah.
focusing on race, of course, what will they be hated on less, or will it be the same amount of hate that we're going through to this day, like right to excuse me, in modern day, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
Are,
that's a really juicy question. And I've had some like pretty deep conversations about that question, because there are some people who think like there's a food chain. There's always been a food chain, and there always will be a food chain. So someone's always going to be controlled and someone's not. And to think that that's not the case is like some utopian made up crap, right? Like I've heard that dialogue. I don't know that I have an answer for, will people hurt less because of the way that we treat one another, bullying, psychological or physiological harm of ourselves and harm of others. But I think I know some of the antidotes. And I think first and foremost, emotional intelligence is one of them. And that's not something we teach beyond like keep your hands to your like elementary school age. I think we touch on social emotional learning, like keep your hands to yourself, sit at your desk, but that's more about conditioning the behaviors that schools want to see in people. Another great book, In Defense of Childhood, talks about how public school system in the United States was based upon Puritan values and ways of being, and to create assembly line workers. There's even like some stuff in that book around like the school bell was to mimic the bell in factories. So people knew like by the time you were old enough to work in a factory, your brain had been conditioned to know like when the bell rings, I start working. When the bell rings, I take a break. When the bell rings, I start working. And so it was all about conditioning the brain and people to be factory workers. And so In Defense of Childhood, great book. So the reason I brought that up was, will we hurt less? So emotional intelligence, who am I? How does my brain work? How does my body work? So like the vagus nerve, the reptilian part of the brain, the amygdala, the frontal cortex. Like I think the more we can learn about how our brain works, hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, a lot of these adult workshops are and like management or adaptive leadership workshops are about learning how the human brain works. And then how do I master that so that I can be intentional about how I show up? What happens when I get triggered? Do I flip out on someone? Do I run away? Do I disassociate? like learning how our brain works and how our body works, and then be able to get masterful about that. Meditation, mindfulness, those are all practices that help us practice and increase our clarity, our ability to show up intentionally and self-manage in those ways. So I think that's one thing, like mindfulness, understanding the brain and the body, and being able to practice those things and do it intentionally. We also talk about, like in adaptive leadership, they talk about disequilibrium or dissonance and the productive zone of it. Like creativity happens when we experience some contrast, some disequilibrium. But every single human being has a capacity where I just like, it's too stressful and I totally shut down and I get in this like fight, flight, flee, disassociate stage, or the I'm not experiencing any heat or contrast and I'm just like bouncing along. So I think that's a huge part of us as a human race. And honestly, I think it's about relearning, because I really, 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 really think that our ancestors way, way back knew these things. They just didn't talk about them that way. Like that movie in Avatar where you see the people like rocking, collectively rocking. Those are great examples of like how to help heal and ground the vagus nerve. I don't think our ancestors were like, "Oh, boo, your vagus nerve is flared up. Let's rock together." They just like knew those things helped heal and center and ground people as a collective, right? So I think it's about relearning those things. If we can do that, I think that's a thing. And then the other thing I think is going to be really helpful, and I will give so much credit to my mother for this. My mom has worked in the music industry my whole entire life, and when I was young, like elementary school age, she did like lip sync. Lip sync was really popular here, and all my mom's friends, one, looked like everything. They were straight, they were gay, they were black, they were white, they were tall, they were skinny. Like my mom has always had really cool, creative, a wide variety of friends. The other piece that was really important was like, my mom's friend Tolliver was a really famous Michael and Jackson impersonator. And so he was Tolliver, but he was also Michael Jackson. And then her other friend Dave did like the Blues Brothers, but he also did Batman. And so I grew up with this idea that friends look like everything and friends fall in love with people who look like them and don't. And I wasn't the only biracial person in my life at that time as a young person. And the other thing was you could be whoever you wanted to be. And it wasn't until I was like, I think I was like 35, and I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues who's Black male and he is gay. And we were talking about like his journey, and I just became overwhelmed with tears because I had this aha moment that like I have never had to grapple with coming out, which is total shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to, I'll say it again, which is not cool, just in case you need to edit the cussing out. And I never had to go through this moment of like when people have this aha moment around like racism is real. I never had to like unlearn that everybody's beautiful. And I think my mom did a really good job of teaching me. Like there's some people who's like, you're raised colorblind. I think a part of it was color blindness, but the other piece was just like my mom was like, people are cool and it's cool to know diverse people and you can be whoever you want to be. And I think that's where the arts as a sector is missing in racial equity work is like, what's his name? Cornell West. Cornell West, in one of his speeches that I saw, he talked about the fact that artists have always, always been trying to get us right with it. And he pulled up the lyrics of all these different amazing, like Marvin Gaye and just like all these artists from different racial backgrounds. And he talked about how like artists have always been telling us, love is all you need, right? The Beatles. They've always been trying to show us the way. And I think artists are really missing from the conversation. So mindfulness, knowing how the brain works and actually spending time with yourself to heal and connect and learn about yourself and heal that so you can be intentional about how you show up when you're in relationship with other people. And then the second piece is bringing arts and artists in and bringing diversity in early and often. There's a great TED talk by Verna Myers where she talks about if you're only around, it's about the brain associating implicit bias. If you only see Black people on cops being beat up and being criminals, your brain is going to think that Black bodies are inherently criminals and bad. Versus I look at Black men and I think they're beautiful and strong and I feel safe with them because my dad is beautiful and strong and I feel safe with him. So my association of Black bodies is comfort and joy and safety. But it required having a beautiful, phenomenal, strong Black man in my life to make me feel that way. So I think diversity, listening and partnering with artists, and learning about ourselves as a human race. Those would be the three things that I think in my life have been instrumental in making me who I am, the things that I love about myself, and the things that I bring into my practice.
I love how you bring up artists into the equation too, because I'm just really thinking about how they can feel the music and they can really feel what they're doing. And I like how they're definitely the type of people who we should be bringing into the conversation, because they can really feel and like empathize, or just, like really want to understand and really try their best to understand, even if they can't, they really are there, and they make music for other people so that they can be there for other people without necessarily also being there for other people, if I'm saying that correctly. But
Yeah.
I really like that. I really like what you're saying. You are so knowledgeable. I love all these different things that you're bringing into the equation, because you have all these books. You're like TED Talk. I'm like, you're giving me a bunch of books I'm about to look up after this podcast. Like, that's so cool.
The School of TED. You're in New York, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about like the Statue of Liberty, and we can debate like the impact that has on people, the differential impact. However, I want to use the Statue of Liberty as a great example of like the impact that artists have. So think about how many immigration stories have that Statue of Liberty in them. Like when my great grandmother came across from Ireland and she saw the Statue of Liberty, like what would those stories be without the Statue of Liberty? Like, oh, I
That's
saw a
true.
shore. Like I saw a shore and I got off the boat. It doesn't have the same impact of like there's this massive green lady
Yeah.
and like I finally like artists play this like untold like hidden figures, right? They play this like hidden role in our awakening, our collective conscious awakening. Artists are always trying to like get us hip to like what is and what could be and what was. And I think they just, a side note, obviously I'm an artist since I'm like super passionate about it, but like, your t-shirt, it's telling me something, right? And it took an artist to like create that moment, the art behind you, like to see Maya Angelou's glorious face behind you and Dr. King and Malcolm, and like an artist's ability to capture those people and replicate that feeling. When you said like musicians feel it, visual artists, creative, like any sort of artist who's able to like capture something and then like share that gift with other people. I don't know if people talk enough about like how art, music influences their journey.
Yeah. That's very true. And youth really need that platform in order to really explore and their different talents, their different abilities. I remember when I was younger, something that I would mainly do was actually draw a lot. That was how I would get my little Devin artistic side out. And then like now that kind of changed to like, I'll be honest, I'm not an artist anymore as far as drawing, but now I'm more into writing, and I love to write. I love poetry. I love conveying my feelings and like expressing myself through that. And I tend to do it in a way where it's just like whatever I'm feeling in that moment, I have to write it down. If I'm really feeling the urge to write it down, I will write down whatever I'm feeling. And then that turns into a poem that I enter into a competition, which I actually did do that, like,
Yes.
and I actually made it to nationals for that, but we don't need to get into that. So,
Let's get into that. Okay, Black excellence.
but that was, and that's also actually dealing with the NAACP, because they had
Oh,
AXO.
listen, let's get into it.
Well, since we are on the topic though, so are you familiar with AXO?
With what?
It's called AXO.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so it stands for the Afro Academic, Cultural, Technological, and Scientific Olympics. So when I became a few years ago, when I became or a part of the youth, whatever, but basically I'm part of the NAACP, NAACP member, and so we found out that there's AXO, and so you can compete for like science. I have a friend who also competed, and like we actually became friends through AXO. He does something with like microbiology. I have a friend who also is poetry like me, we can relate through that. And so I was talking about my experiences dealing with racism. She was talking about her seeing others as far as like mental health and stuff, and she related it to balloons. And like we got to nationals for that. We have other people who were they were drawing and uh oh, someone danced, like, and then like to see all this beautiful young black excellence, melanin kings and queens, I like to say on.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
see them there. I'm like, oh, and on top of that, during like when we went to Detroit, that was like 2019, I think, something like that. It was a few years ago. And so when we went there, we were there for like a week. So over the course of getting there, and then for like 2 to 3 days of the like all the dancers practicing, they were from all over, and then they because they won from the local competition and became nationalists. So over the course of about like 3 days, they created this amazing dance, and it just shows you how amazing, like beautiful black excellence young men and women, young black men and women, and then just get into the actual like when they were presenting to the judges, when all of us, I mean, were presenting to the judges. And so I had my like suit on, and I was just like, you know, um, this is how I race to speak up. That was actually part of my poem. And I told them like in the poem, I was like, I went through all this pain because of you three boys putting my face onto these racist images. I went through all of this pain because of the fact that you were hating on me for something that makes me beautiful, which is my skin color. You saw
Mhm.
me as a threat, but in reality, you not no. This is something I actually learned over the course of just both my race to speak up career and just being a black person and who went through all that racism. They were threatened by a smart black person, not just the fact that I'm black, but like my intelligence also. They all knew that I was smart. And on top of that, I'm just vocal. So I quickly told my parents what they did. And we went to the now that because luckily I came from parents who are smart too and know how to speak up in an intelligent way. And we took those photos, evidence to the school, and still that's a whole nother story where they turned a blind eye to our pain. They said, Devin, go back to class. They said, Devin, well, by them telling me to go back to class, that translates to this is nothing, Devin. And like what do we this doesn't it's not affecting, right? When in reality, I couldn't sleep at night. I was going through anxiety. I still have paranoia to this day, which luckily therapy has helped me tremendously with, but I still
Good.
have anxiety as my main thing that I have, and it comes up randomly. Just the
Yep.
fact that I'm with my peers, it comes up randomly. And I know I was talking about the AXO competition, but now I'm just shifting this. But regardless, like, when you think about bullying and when you think about racism, when you think about homophobia or ableism or any of these different isms or things that you get hated on for,
Yep.
these are long lasting effects.
Yep.
I remember when I was younger, I thought I would never want anyone to take pictures of me again. I thought I would never want anyone to record videos of me again. Now I'm here speaking on a podcast with changemakers like yourself. Now I'm taking pictures because I always love to take pictures in front of positive affirmation murals, with my shirts on. Like right now, I have Be the Change shirt on. I always do that because I want to spread that positive message for others and let them know that we are strong. We need to claim that power back because we have power. I always say that, these are all the messages that I really try to spread because I want youth like me to understand that we need to understand the fact that we just need to understand this, like we
Yeah.
need to learn from each other. I always want, like, this is why I'm so happy to be speaking with you or speaking with, all the change makers that I talk with, because you guys have different perspectives. You guys are doing great things. Like you have, all the things you're dealing with anti-racism and racial equity and, Eastside Pathways. And you also have Pono Pursue. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna stop talking right now. Why don't you tell us about Pono Pursue?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm so thankful for you being a vehicle to get this information and these diverse perspectives out to young people. Um, Before I talk a little, and it ties into Pono Pursuit, but um, I think one thing that's really important when you were talking about like it just coming back randomly. Again, my grandmother's hands, Resma Menikin talks about trauma ghosting, where it's like this little ghost who pops up out of nowhere, right? And to constantly be like, "Ooh, it's going to come back somewhere." And I think it's really important. I appreciate you naming that, because I think, again, this moment to realize like I'm not the only person who experiences that. And the other piece is like epigenetics, the fact that like that trauma ghosting, sometimes it's not even something that happened to me, but it's something that happened to my grandmother or the woman before
Yeah.
her. Like, this idea that like I was a little Kalika egg in my mom's ovaries when my mom was in her mother's womb. So whatever happened to my grandmother's body happened to my mother's body and happened to my body. Right? Like that's real stuff that I don't know that we talk about. So sometimes when we're like, I don't know, I just feel a heaviness. And I have this conversation with my kids is like, A, the fact that you recognize it as a sign of your emotional intelligence and your strength. B, sometimes it's not your wound to heal, it's our elders' wounds to heal. This compounding intergenerational trauma and wealth. I don't want to skip over the wealth that we get from our ancestors as well. And I think that goes into why I started Pono Pursuit. I am not Hawaiian by any means, but one of my aunts moved to Hawaii decades ago. And as a young person, I had the honor and the blessing to be able to spend some summers paddling in Hawaii and being around Hawaiian elders. And they've been highly influential in my life. And, you know, when I'm in Hawaii, one thing I learned early was like the version of Hawaii that I got isn't the version that everyone gets. And what's the version that I get is this idea of Pono, which is talking about being in alignment and reciprocity with like the whole ecosystem, right? And everybody. So Hawaiian culture is collective culture. Um, and it's all about like mutually beneficial action, which is Eastside Pathways, mutually reinforcing activities for the greater good. So there's that shared value in the Hawaiian culture and the work that I get, the honor that I get to do. But the thing that was missing for me, in a lot of the spaces I went to, was one, a lot of the racial equity trainings I went to, or any education I've ever had, has centered white learners and white teachers. And so one of the things I would find as an adult, like in a racial equity training, was like, before I'd go to the training, they'd say, "Hey, can you read this article on the life and the day of a Black student?" And I'm like, "Oh, so this training isn't for Black people because I don't need to read the article." That's my lived experience. And so I just realized there was a gap in having people teach me that understood me, and not just like intellectually, but like lived experience. I've been very blessed to participate in Pacific Educational Group's work. Their Courageous Conversations has been a phenomenal tool in my journey to get to here. Um, and so Pono Pursuit for me is an opportunity to live through my values of being in alignment, not only with other human beings, but with human nature. Being in alignment with our planet is a big part of my values as a human being, hence the plants everywhere. I'm a gardener as well. And so it's a vehicle for me to love on and be in community with other people of color to ensure that we're doing the racial healing work. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about racial equity work, we talk about white supremacy culture and how harmful that is for people of color and for white people. But I don't think we have enough conversations around like what is the healing that people of color need to do. So when you ask like, will we experience less pain, or what is this going to look like for young people? I feel so much joy, Devin, seeing you and seeing my three children, because I see the evidence. When I said like, I see the evidence of the difference between my grandmother saying, "Don't say nothing. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say nothing at all." And I can see the difference in what's happened over the time of our history between her life and mine. And when I see people like yourself who are like, "I am Black, I am beautiful, I am intelligent, I'm excellent, and you're not gonna play me." What? That is so amazing. And it is an evidence of the work that has happened before you. So I don't know what your future and the next generation are going to have to deal with, but I do know that I've seen the fruits of those labor. Like I had to question whether or not my voice was welcome. And then I had to get to the point where, like, I actually don't care whether or not you want my voice in here. My perspective is valid. I don't hear my perspective being shared, and that's harmful. It's traumatizing for me, and it's not helping us create a better future. I don't hear you with that struggle. I hear you saying, it's not okay for you to treat me that way. My parents have raised me to know that I'm Black, beautiful, and intelligent, and we're going to move ahead based upon that reality. The last thing I want to say about that about this and thing is particular, one thing that I'm from a policy standpoint that I'm really uh, humored because I just think it's absolutely absurd, is anybody who works with young people are mandated reporters, right? So any form of abuse while you are in my care, I am mandated to report, right? Sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, any of those things, I am legally required to mandate, I am a mandated reporter. Racism has been classified as a form of trauma, just like sexual trauma, just like neglect. However, to your point, if you report racial trauma in the classroom, in the workplace, you still have to be put back in the room with your abuser. If a teacher were to touch a student inappropriately, the teacher would be removed and the student would not be required to go back into the environment with the person who harmed them. However, 100% of the time, when a student of color reports being racially abused, racially traumatized, they are put back into the space with their abuser and they're told that they are the problem. That is mind boggling to me. There is a protocol in place. Another great example of how absolutely ridiculous this is. As an educator, if you show a film that's like over PG-13, there's a piece of paper that goes home to your parent, and your parent says, nope, I don't want my child to watch this, or yeah, that's okay. Same thing with sex ed. We're going to teach sexual or education. Do you want your child to be in the classroom? Nope, I don't. Please send them to the library, give them some snacks, let them do some independent learning. Great. There is an existing protocol where I, as your parent, can say, I don't want you, racially unconscious teacher, to teach my child about lynching, because you can't do that in a trauma-informed way that's going to add value to Devin's life. I want to opt my child out of that. And I can tell you that I'm educating them on Black is Beautiful at home. I don't want you to miseducate my child. There's a protocol in place. There's a protocol in place, yet it doesn't apply to racial issues. Last example I'll give, Catcher on the Rye. I think that's the book right now that everybody's like, pull it out of classrooms, ban it. It is really kind of relatively easy to ban a book and make sure that it's removed from all the school libraries, right? Yet we acknowledge that the curriculum that we're teaching students now is a lie. We didn't just have pumpkin pie and all the Native Americans didn't just magically disappear. And we know that, yet we continue to have school books that teach that. But we can easily remove things like Lolita from the library. We can easily remove things like Catch and Run. People throw a stink, but ultimately they're removed and dead the issue. But yet we still have books on the shelves that are continue to harm. I'm going to say all students, even white students. White students are harmed because I work with the adults of all race, economic backgrounds. And one of the things I most commonly hear from white leaders who are really passionate quite often about racial equity work are saying, I had no idea. I didn't know. That wasn't the education I got. And I would say to those people, I received the same education you did, but my lived experience let me know that that was a lie, and that I chose to spend the time to re-educate myself. So my invitation is to white leaders who are feeling lost and like their heads are getting blown off because they're just now waking up white. Another book title for you. Do the work, re-educate yourself. We have the internet, we have libraries. Please don't go bug a bunch of Black people though. Like, educate yourself. So that's my elevator speech. And that's a part of why I started Pono Pursuit is I wanted to make sure that people of color had spaces and coaching that was responsive to their needs. And then I also wanted to make sure that I had a space and a vehicle for one of my uncles, Kimokeo, my Hawaiian uncle. He talks about, like, you know, he's like, I'm an elder and my cup is full and my job is to pour into you, right? And so I try to find areas where I think my cup is full and then make sure that I'm sharing that with other people, because there was a time where I didn't have that consciousness and I hadn't done that healing. And I'm really passionate about particularly women of color being in relationship and in community with them to make sure that they feel supported, seen, and heard.
That's amazing. And I kind of want to just quickly go back to, you do have things that you can look up online. Like, we don't know everything. We may know a lot, but we don't know everything. We're not gonna, advocate for our whole community or communities. I found myself being like the only Black person in the room, and it's just white people asking me a bunch of questions. Actually, it's not even only white people, if we're really gonna be honest. It was different races that weren't, necessarily Black, like they weren't Black. They've asked me questions, and I'm still learning myself, so I don't know about all these things. I know I don't want you touching my hair. As I don't want you touching my hair. I know that I don't want teachers, not pet, like, oh, you know what, let's not get into that story. But I don't want anyone to touch,
Feel it
to
though.
pet my hair.
I feel it. I felt it. I felt it. I'm here. I've been there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm
feel it.
like, I'm this, and then of course, like I said communities because I'm also a part of the LGBT community. And I'm not about to advocate for the whole LGBT community because I say I'm not trying to, say that they're both the same. I'm saying that there is diversity within them because with Black people, we have all different shades, all different cultures. So, very diverse, and
Mhm.
I don't know all of that. So I'm like, I'm not about to, of course, I'm about to teach myself. My parents are about to teach me, and all these other activists and advocates are about to teach me, but I don't know all of it, and I'm not about to teach all of you guys. We have the internet, we have libraries, go read a book. Go read a book.
Those
And
little boundaries I was talking about. I'm
I
like,
know, I
yes, Devin, you
know.
have boundaries.
Exactly,
I
exactly.
love it.
Now there are times where I can't deny my activist side and will say a lot. I will say if I feel comfortable, I will say what's on my mind and I will educate you. I mean, my a lot of my peers know that I know a lot about bullying. And so once you stop me, you kind of can't really stop me talking about it. So
It's
they
passion.
listen. Huh?
It's passion. But I think here's the thing is like one thing is whenever I'm trying to decide, like, suss out like what's happening in a moment that just like, I don't know, like one of my ancestors is like reaching up, like, we're not about to do this. And I'm like, but why? Ancestor, why are we not doing this? Like, I have to ask myself, does this look like I take myself a little time machine and I go back to, in my head, I go back to like when we were working on plantations and I ask myself, does this look any different? So if there's someone sitting in the shade up on the front porch and they're like, I'm really curious about bullying. Hey, Devin, can you come over here? Can you explain bullying to me? If that moment looks like that, I'm like, Now, if you got off the front porch, came up from underneath the shade, brought me a glass of water and a snack and a chair, and you sat down with me out in the sweltering heat, provided me some nourishment and a nice place to sit, I might be like, okay, you came over here. You put some effort in. But if it's this idea of like, am I still in a role of servitude? Like, are the archetypes of Black bodies being in servitude still manifesting themselves in this moment? I'm out here working for free in the sweltering heat. You're on the front porch with a glass of lemonade, a comfy chair, and some shade. And you want me to come all the way across here to answer a question for you that you can look up on Dr. Google? I'm not the one, right? Like, that's the thing that I use for myself when I'm like, no, this does look like just like that. And I think about one of the things I'm very fortunate to do locally is host a POC only space. We also have a white affinity space. And then nationally, I help host a multicultural, racial, ethnic space with one of our partners. And one of the things I think is really just interesting about that ideology is just like how many people I talk to where when we do that timeline overlay around the relationship dynamics, doesn't really look different. Like, am I in service of, and we talk about like one of the heavy conversations was after the murder of George Floyd, like the summary of the conversation we were having in the POC space was the increase in white curiosity created an increase of demand of my time. So here I am grieving an increased sense of fear of like, I already knew driving while Black was a thing. And if I'm gonna be really honest, Devin, the murder of Breonna Taylor was a thing that just like destroyed me because I had always taught myself and told my kids that like at home we're always safe. And the murder of Breonna Taylor was not even here. You can come through my front door and you can kill me and you can not get in trouble for it. There can be no consequences. That was the final straw for me. And going back to like, what does that mean to work with humans and be in community and have that fear and that trauma and that loss that with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor was this is still our current reality and there are no consequences for it. And in the face of all this, how many people called you and said like, I'm here for you and I see you and I see your pain and I'm sorry. And is there anything you need from me? Versus how many people said, oh my God, I had no idea. This is absolutely insane. I need you to talk to me about your experience as a Black person. So what you're doing is you're centering yourself in your curiosity. And I'm glad that this has shook you. And I'm glad that you're curious. But right now you're making this about you and not about me. Right? It's exact same moment. And those boundaries, that's where I was saying those healthy boundaries to say, like, I, four types of racism, personal racism. If in that moment I shoved my pain down and I said, you know what? I'm going to show up for you because you're curious. And I hope someday you'll treat someone who looks like me better because I spent this time with you. Has it ever changed anything today? I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. And that's an unfortunate truth. What is different is you saying, I'm experiencing pain and trauma right now. And it feels really crappy to know that right now you're making this about you and you're not acknowledging my humanity in this moment. And I decline to spend my time with you. That's something that's different. I'm not going to be in service of you right now. I'm going to be in service of myself and my healing and my well-being. And I think that's a part of the racial equity movement that's missing is us setting healthy boundaries for ourselves.
What's been the most challenging part of your journey?
I think the emotional piece of I'm nerdy too, right? Like and I think that's been a part of my journey is recognizing and being okay with saying I'm smart. But I think I have a tendency in the Pacific Educational Group, they have like this compass thing where they talk about like, where do you tend to show up? Do you tend to show up in thinking, feeling, believing? And I have a tendency to show up in a place of believing. Like, I think I know some things. And based upon what I think I know, I believe that you should treat me respectfully because I'm a human being. I believe that I pay my mortgage every month and I put a lock on the front door. Therefore, you have no right to bang down my front door and shoot me while I'm sleeping in my bed. I just believe that for some kind of reason. So when Breonna Taylor gets murdered, it broke all these beliefs that I had. And so on a daily basis, I feel a sense of constant loss and trauma anytime someone's behavior, story, or beliefs conflicts with mine. One, I need to grow as a human being and continue to create space for other people's lived experience and perspectives because I value diversity. So I recognize I need to change and continue to grow as a human being to create space for other people, right? The second component is sometimes that gap or that contrast is because the things that people think and believe about me are harmful. So when I'm around someone and I don't have to do anything, I can just sit there. And if you feel afraid of me because I have a Black body and I'm an angry Black woman, I don't see myself as that way. I see myself as loving and hospitable and kind and kind of I say I'm a bougie hippie. Like I have a Louis Vuitton purse, but I like to play in the dirt. Right? If you don't see me that way, it causes me pain because I'm like, what is it? Is it something I'm doing or is it about your implicit bias towards Black bodies? So dealing with that on a daily basis, that is the hardest thing about my work is that gap between how I see myself and how people see you, Devin, and how people see my parents and how people see my children and how people see my partner. Those are the things that hurt me the most. And then the second thing I'll say is being patient because it took me time to get to this place of healing racial consciousness and I have lots of room to grow. And then there's people who, people who willfully are ignorant are like, racism isn't real, you're crazy. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people that are like, whoa, I didn't know and I'm just now figuring this out. Being patient with those people, that's hard because I want change now. I want you to love me for who I am now. And I don't want to have to wait for you to realize that you have implicit bias towards Black women or Black men. And raising a Black daughter and two Black sons, my sense of urgency is there's no, it's like, how do I balance? Like, you need to do right by my babies. And I don't want to have fear every time they walk out the front door because that's not right. And it's not sustainable. And the level of stress is just, oh Lord, it's more than I can handle. So it's hard to be patient because I see people who have potential and want to be more loving and more conscious and do that racial healing. And at the same time, I need you to do better yesterday. So
Yeah.
those are two things.
Yeah, Ben needed you to do better yesterday.
I'm curious for you, like, what do you think are the things that make this work difficult?
The fact that there's so much of it we need to do. Nah, I really think that it's the fact that there's so many new types of things, like so many new subsections and sublabels of the different types of hate. I think that are like continue to keep growing and keep coming out of like I tend to just say keep coming out of nowhere. Like they keep things maybe I want to say mutate or like change, transform into something even worse. And like, we have bullying, then we have cyberbullying, we have social bullying, we have verbal bullying, physical bullying, we have other types of, like, there's so many different types. And so we have now, with me, I just focus in on cyberbullying mainly because of the fact that there's so much of it. And because we have that, we have more subsections of that. We
Mm,
have where's the anonymous factor, anonymity factor, or knowing this person but they don't get caught, or knowing this person and like you show people evidence and they don't believe you, like and then more factors of that. So and breaking down those aspects, I think that's really one of the main things that are hard to do, or like the main challenges, I guess, as far as just like anti-bullying work. But the passion for that change, for that positive change, is what keeps me going. That passion for wanting everyone at school and wanting everyone in the world to just be happy with each other, though I know that isn't really possible. I still want that, or at least just to get rid of this bullying problem. If I can be a part of one thing that gets rid of something that hurts people, I want to be a part of the positive change that puts an end to bullying. And so that's why I'm like, though it's hard, I'm still trying my best and I'm still doing anything that I can because of the fact that I know how painful it is. And I don't want anyone to feel the pain that I went through. And,
yeah.
I don't want anyone to feel racism,
Yeah.
which we've been feeling for way too long. But that's a unique, I feel like that's kind of a unique statement just to say, because of the fact that we've been going through that for so long. And there's different, like you're saying, the four types of racism, there's more subsections of that and more subsections of those. And really breaking these things down. When we say break these things down, and now I'm really just kind of talking to the audience, when we say break these things down, of course, we want everyone to listen. We really want to dive deep into these things. We really want everyone to understand why we're terrified, or why we're, more like, I don't really want to say angry, because whenever I think of the word angry in relation to race, I think of when there's those racist people who say angry black woman, and that's why I don't necessarily want to say angry, but that's why we're enraged. I'll say enraged, I guess, by the fact that there's so much hate going on. And so all these different subsections and things we have to really dive deep into. I think that's just kind of like the hardest part, is really diving deep into those and coming to a common, or like a conclusion, or like I don't even want to say agreement. Like, I just kind of want to rephrase everything because of the fact that there's so many different things that we need to do. I hope I'm really making sense with that. But like, just we really need to dive deep into things. That's just all I want. We really need to understand all these different types of hate, and or at least just try to empathize, at least just try to listen. If you're not white, I mean, oh God, I'm trying to say, if you are white and your black friend who you've had as a friend for like since age like 2, and now you're both are like 18-year-olds about to go off to college or something, and you see Black Lives Matter and you see all the hate towards black people. Like you're saying, you shouldn't be like, oh my God, let me sit down and let me hear everything of what's going on from this one black person. You really need to first, you really need to just um I feel like I'm now kind of starting to like repeat what you're saying, but like, you really need to understand. Really, though, you do need to listen, but we're not gonna, be telling you everything of what's what. You see what's happening in the news, you should know that it's wrong. These people, we're people. We're all people. We just look different, we all look different from each other. That shouldn't stop us from being friends. That shouldn't start us on hating on each other. And
Mhm.
so I'm just like, we need to embrace those differences, and we need to understand that we are all a part of the human race. So that's one race. We're all a
Um,
part of one race. Scientifically, too, it
yeah.
says that we're a part of one race.
Have you
So,
seen like that exhibit like where um they show like I think it's like the incredible human body or something like that, and like they some amazing artists and scientists were able to like preserve the nervous system, but then like pull away all the meat and the bone. And so you see like the brain, the eyeballs, and then like all the nerves that run through the body. And I've seen this meme that says like, I don't know how people, everybody who looks like this on the inside is trying to tell themselves that they look cuter than somebody else. Cause it's not a pretty image. Like these eyeballs and like a gray matter brain sac, and then like all these little, they look like roots to a tree, right? The nervous system that runs through the body. Like we truly are all the same genetically, right? To whatever degree. And so race is a social construct. I think it's something really cool that you were mentioning earlier around just kind of like language. Like our people have always known, um, in the Black movement, right, the post-slavery movement, chattel slavery movement has been like using the power of language, like the brilliance of Black people to be like, this wasn't our mother tongue, but we learned it and we're about to flip it on you. And so this idea that like, and we saw the history of like, we're not going to be a negger or your negro. We're going to be, and you want to call us color people. Well, now we're Black people and it's Black power. Like we've always taken that language back to re-empower ourselves. And I think one thing I really want to touch upon around the angry Black woman archetype is recognizing that like, I am angry. I'm very angry. I am enraged. I am hurt. I am mourning for so much about through my racial identity. And it took a lot to be able to realize that like the archetype of the angry Black woman, if I swallow that pill, then what I'm saying is that I'm oppressing my feelings because the feeling I'm feeling is anger, it is rage, it is mourning, it is loss. And then, like, if I'm afraid of being labeled the angry Black woman, anytime anger comes up, I'm gonna shove it back down, right? And so you don't have to control me because I'm controlling myself. That is one of the strategies of oppression is like, I'm gonna make you so afraid of being your authentic self that you're not gonna be your authentic self and I don't even have to worry about you. Right. And I think that's why what Emmett Till's mother did was so powerful was like she was able to grieve, not able to, but she was courageous enough to grieve in public. I am angry and I am mourning and I'm going to do that in public to give back to all the other Black mothers and publicly show the fear that we experience on a daily basis every time our children leave our homes. Right. So it's about taking back our human rights because anger is not a bad emotion. It's just one of the many emotions that humans experience. And honestly, like, how can I ever get to a higher frequency of emotion? Another great book, Letting Go. Um, how can I get to a higher frequency of emotion like joy and love and peace and acceptance if I don't ever process my anger and I'm just constantly shoving it back down to the point where I become apathetic? Like, and I think these are the conversations we have to have as people of color around like the manifestation of that for Black men is Black men are inherently scary. They will kidnap your children. They will break into your home. They will hurt you. And so Black men want to be calm, cool, composed. I got my hands in my pocket. I'm not stealing anything. I don't have a gun. I'm chill. Don't be afraid of me, lady. Like, and if you were to express anger in public, he was angry. He was even scarier. I had every right to shoot him dead in my right. So it's like there's two different brands of it, but essentially Black bodies have been taught do not express anger in public, even though we have every single right to be. And I think one of the things I really look forward to seeing is that Black people and people of color, all people, are able to reclaim all of their emotions, recognize that they're healthy expressions of our human experience, and not be afraid to feel our feelings. And that's also why I want to shout you out for saying, like, I experienced trauma and I went to counseling because I think we're not doing that as much as we need to, and I think that goes back again to that allostatic load and the trauma and the health issues that we as Black people have because we're not dealing with our feelings and we're afraid to feel our feelings. Honestly, I'll just say this quickly. I led this training a couple weeks ago. I took an adaptive leadership master program back in 2018, and now I've been really honored to be able to go back and teach some of their workshops. And one of the participants gave feedback and said, don't ever bring Kalika back. I don't like Kalika. And I was laughing hysterically because I was like, that's about you. Like, if you could come to me in a respectful way and say, here's the things that you did, and this is the impact that it had on me. Can we have a dialogue about that? I would take that really seriously because you're showing up in your humanity and I can understand a little bit more about you as a human being. And maybe you can understand a little bit more about me. We can both grow as a result. But when you just throw shade and you're like, she's an angry Black woman and I don't like her, all that does is show who you are as a person. It doesn't help me grow. And so I'm not interested in it. So I just, I appreciate you being mindful of the power of language. And I really look forward to us reclaiming anger collectively as a human race, reclaiming anger as a healthy, normal emotion. Anger is just as healthy as happy, right? Reclaiming that emotion, and then particularly for Black bodies, being able to do that anger, because we have a lot to be mad about. We have a lot to be mad about.
Well, I appreciate you for sharing all of your knowledge and all the amazing things that you're doing in this world. This is a really good conversation, Kalika.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share. Thank you for everything that you're doing for creating this platform to connect young people um, to thought partners, and your words change makers, elders. It's an absolute honor, and I love seeing young people like yourself being Black and excellent and beautiful and amazing, and that is the greatest gift. And I want to know more about that program. All three of my kids are like super smart and creative, and I would love to get them plugged into something like that, because I think that's really dope. So just keeping excellent and keeping you, and thank you for sharing your platform with me.
Well, would you like to share your social media platforms and your website?
So my website is www.diversityandeducation.org or .org, and then my Instagram handle is diversity and education on Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My name is Kalika Curry, Kalika, last name Curry, Curry. And if you want to learn more about collective impact in East King County, you should visit www.eastsidepathways.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Kalika.
Thank you. This was so cool. This is the first video podcast I've ever done. So this is like so exciting.
Oh, okay, cool. And thank you all who are listening. I hope to see you guys at future Race to Speak Up podcasts. If you have any questions about the Race to Speak Up podcast, feel free to contact me at racetospeakup@gmail.com. Make sure to follow at Race to Speak Up on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for updates on future podcasts. Make sure to go over to my website, which is www.racetospeakup.com, and check out all things Race to Speak Up and join the Humanity Rising movement. Humanity Rising offers scholarships for students making a difference in the world through service. Visit www.humanityrising.org for more information. Remember to ask yourself this question: how do you race to speak up?